Greetings everyone, I am Dr. Wolf, and I just watched The End in Friend, a Rarity/Rainbow Dash focused episode. We haven't had one of those in quite some time. And it's actually a story on exactly why they are friends in the first place. You know, aside from the fact that the main six have kind of always been friends for as long as the show's been going, they don't really have all that much in common. They're really not the kind of ponies you'd expect to spend a lot of time together when it's just the two of them. And crafting an entire story on that premise alone, it could have some potential, and the way this episode goes, yeah, I think they did just about as much as they could have done with that kind of setup. But starting from the beginning, I like the idea that this is a story focused not just around Rarity and Rainbow Dash figuring out all of a sudden, you know, we don't really have that much in common, but rather it's the student six who are kind of pointing out, why are you two friends in the first place? And it kind of expanding into Twilight and Starlight, trying to make it into a lesson throughout the episode for the student six to learn. It's a much better way to keep things going, rather than just focusing on Rarity and Rainbow Dash talking to each other and, yeah, getting into fight after fight after fight. Because that does tend to get pretty old pretty fast. I will admit, moving the episode to the point where they're cordial with each other to where I don't want to be friends with you anymore, it is fairly quick. But in order for the episode to work, you had to kind of get to that point before the first commercial break. So I'm willing to give it a little bit of leeway, and I suppose having an audience of students watching you during your day of fun adds a little bit of undue pressure on top of that. It's a little convoluted, but for the sake of the story, I can let that pass. It is still a little irritating watching them not looking at each other and always trying to put each other down, and yeah, it can get pretty old. But I did appreciate some of the more clever moments that you didn't really expect to be clever moments when they first brought it up. For example, when in the beginning, Rarity is showing off some shoes that she's trying on, and Rainbow is pointing out, why are you wearing high heels in the first place? And yeah, that's a really good question. Who designs high heels for a horse? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And as the episode drags on and Rarity is noticing just how much these heels are slowing her down, I thought that was kind of meant to be the joke that, you know, maybe Rainbow had a point. But it turns out, near the end, they turned out to be kind of a Chekhov's gun. When Rarity is using high heels as a lockpick, who could have seen that coming? I don't know who came up with that idea, but that was clever. Setting it up as a joke and then making it seem like, you know, Rainbow had a point, but nope, flip that around. Rarity actually had a point. They are useful for something. That's good writing. I did also appreciate the fact that, at least in some instances where, yeah, you know that Starlight and Twilight are setting up circumstances for a sort of treasure hunt / investigation on getting Rarity and Rainbow Dash to start enjoying each other's company again, which Starlight had disappeared for like, what, 10, 15 seconds and then suddenly reappeared, and then they had this plan all set up. That was impressively quick, but again, I'll let that slide. Also, can I get someone to make a GIF of that line right there? Your drama can wait? That would be fantastic. I did appreciate that, like for example, some of the aspects required Rarity investigating clues, while other aspects required Rainbow knowing, oh, this artifact is made of this kind of stone. You had to have both of them working together in order to make the plot progress. But having them trying to cross this bog, as in they needed to work together to make a raft, instead of, you know, as they do later on, Rainbow Dash could just pick Rarity up and fly over it in the first place, it is a little convoluted. It's a little over the top to make the story function that way, but a much better way to make things work is later on whenever they're meeting this, I don't even know what it's called, this big frog thing with multiple eyes. with serious case of bad breath, having them work together to create a breath mint, hey, that's interesting and it's a little creative. More instances like that keep the story engaging. I think that several aspects of this story where, characters are not really sharing the same interests and they're worried about, are we ever going to really be friends with this hanging over our heads? It does sound kind of similar to, say, Uncommon Bond, where Starlight was wondering whether she could ever really connect with Sunburst, considering the fact that he had a lot more in common with several other ponies. And yeah, that is an interesting lesson to teach. And given my own experiences, especially during my review of Uncommon Bond, it reminded me a lot of the relationship I share with my lady, where if you make a list of all the things that we share interests in, it's a pretty short list. A lot of the time when we're doing things together, it's much more often we're doing something that she particularly likes and I'm doing it because I know it makes her happy, or we're doing something that I particularly like and she's doing it because she knows it makes me happy. And you work that over the years and you can develop a very close bond that way because you're making that extra effort, that extra sacrifice. And as this episode points out, because you have to work at it, that relationship means all the much more. At least that's the way I've perceived it. And yeah, I can really appreciate My Little Pony teaching that kind of message to both kids and adults. So yeah, I can see the End in Friend having a few more points in its favor for that. I don't know if there's that much to really draw me back into watching the episode again though, because there are maybe a couple of things that really made me laugh. Like, for example, I think the best line throughout this entire episode was probably, if they're already in fashion now, then they're practically out of fashion. That doesn't make any sense. Yeah, it's stuff like that, having that kind of interaction between characters that really hits the mark. But there aren't that many throughout the episode because it's much more focused on the two of them fighting with each other. I did enjoy many callbacks to previous episodes because all the way back in season 1, mentioning the fact that Rainbow saved Rarity during Sonic Rainboom, and even during Rarity Investigates, Rarity had proved Rainbow's innocence. And yeah, that's a very good way to set up the story about why they've done well working together, but not necessarily about why they are friends, because that doesn't really show shared interests. I do appreciate callbacks to, say, Buckball season. We haven't seen that in a while. And beyond that, I think that there was enough in this particular story to where they had to move things along at a fairly quicker pace rather than trying to find things to fill the time like they did with last week's episode. And yeah, I'd much prefer a story where there's a little too much to try to fit in rather than not quite enough to fit in. Because even though it is moving a little quick to the point where I don't want to be your friend anymore, it's still a worthwhile story if you can just allow yourself to accept the fact that to make this story work, yeah, it's working towards a good lesson. But overall, I'd say this is a fairly good episode for MLP. Not something that I would consider to be great by any means, but fairly good in my opinion. But what do you guys think? Given how many episodes throughout the series we've had between Rarity and Rainbow Dash, and focusing on even the stories that they'd like to read individually, like, could there be further story potential if you had more focus on, say, Daring Do stories versus Shadow Spade stories? I don't know, there could be something to work with there. What do you guys think? Until next time, I am Dr. Wolf, and I look forward to hearing from you.